Well, during the last few years, specifically during the pandemic, we've heard so much about the enormous promise of technology. And these promises are certainly real. During a discussion I had with Vodacom CEO Shamil Jusuf, he revealed that using AI, artificial intelligence, and machine learning, the mobile operator could tell your credit risk based on what time you woke up and started using your mobile phone in the morning. So it's a remarkable technology, but there is another side to it. Technology might also alter human society and the very meaning of human life in ways that we don't really spend, I think, enough time thinking about. As Yuval Harari points out, these range from the creation of a global useless class to the rise of data colonialism and a digital dictatorship. And we've just got to have a look at what's going up north and fears of cyber warfare to understand that it holds great promise, but also holds a lot of potential challenges for society. So we've invited Kavi Pather, EY Africa Artificial Intelligence and Advanced Analytics Leader, to talk to us about what is AI? What is this thing, this buzzword that we always hear about? Kavi, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Michael. Great to be here.
Now, it was so interesting. We ran a poll on BusinessTech just before this. And the question that we asked is, what is the most concerning outcome of AI and the use of advanced algorithms in everyday products and services? And way out in front, 52% of the votes was the removal of the human element from decision making. So I think people under that was privacy violations, general malfunction, and then discrimination. But I think people seriously worry about losing agency. So let's start just firstly with defining what is artificial intelligence, because it's a very hyped term. How do you define it?
Yeah, thanks, Michael. I get asked that a lot, and I actually find it really depends on who you ask. You ask the more technical data scientists, you start to get into territories of where does the boundary between AI, machine learning, statistical analysis lie. The less technical business people tend to call almost anything AI, and it tends to get used as a marketing effort. Regulators seem to also cast quite a wide band, and academics argue even if AI exists. To me, only two answers really are useful. Firstly, I think it's the more aspirational, general use answer, which is the ability to perceive and make sense of information, to retain it, and then to apply it to making decisions. And that's a general sense of what artificial intelligence is. But practically today in business and the way that I engage with it is it's really a collection of technologies: speech, voice recognition, natural language processing algorithms, knowledge representation, and machine learning, all combined really form this thing that we call AI. And so I'm less focused on drawing a line around it and more focused on using these technologies to solve business problems.
Absolutely. And that can be used for good and broader societal problems as well. I often talk to Johan Stein on Business Day TV about how we can use AI for good. But one could actually argue, if you use that definition, that a lot of these technologies have actually been around for a very long time. So why should companies be paying attention to it now? Is it that we're having this convergence of all of these technologies at once? What is bringing this AI conversation to the fore?
Yeah, I think a more general sort of impetus for businesses to really engage with this is that really all businesses need to be innovating right now. I think, as you say, because there's this convergence of a number of technologies and a number of trends in the world, all of these things together, including artificial intelligence, really present a threat and an opportunity. I like to take the story of Kodak, an icon of global commerce. Best digital capability, in fact, in the world a few years ago. And they just didn't innovate. They saw it as cannibalizing the existing business. If you contrast that with Fuji, they saw it coming, decided to embrace it. Today, Fuji is much bigger than they were before, and Kodak is history. And so I think it's the imperative to think about strategy and really innovate that really means we need to pay attention to these things. I think if you bring it back home to here and now, there are 4 or 5 factors around Africa, South Africa today that really are putting a much bigger emphasis on this. Firstly, it starts with the actual data. I think COVID put everything online, so everything has a digital footprint today, and so there's much more power or much more potential that we can implement this technology with. Also, the compute power, number of companies implementing data centers in South Africa, Google, Huawei, Amazon, all entering the country. And then, of course, data scientists. And something that people don't often realize is South Africa, just prior to COVID, ranked number 6 in the world in terms of hiring data scientists. So when you put all that together, and then some of the regulation, the President's Fourth Industrial Revolution Commission, the POPI Act, I think all of these things converge today to really make the next few years in the space really, really interesting. And that's really why we need to be paying attention.
Wow, I was not aware of that that data scientist statistic, number 6 in the world. Truly remarkable. Where do you typically see AI being deployed and used in business today?
I mean, the use cases are enormous, and the short answer is really just everywhere. I mean, if you think of your own life and everyday examples, email, spam filtering, autocomplete on your phone, even this Zoom call and blurring our backgrounds all use AI. In business today, I mean, traditionally it's been used in the more front end parts of businesses, so sales, marketing, targeted advertising, more recently chatbots in terms of customer service. But I think the companies who are really going deep with this stuff are the ones who are embedding it in the operations. So, using it to automate. And then the real leaders I see are those that are embedding it in the products themselves. So take, telematics insurance products as an example, able to predict how you, or learn how you drive, predict how much of an accident risk you are, and actually changing the nature of the product that we sell. So there are a vast number of use cases. And in my view, what businesses really need to be thinking about is what is their strategy and their business challenges first, and then supporting that with AI rather than actually trying to find the use cases that everyone else are perhaps implementing.
Yeah, like a hammer looking for a nail. That you've always got to start with, what is it you're trying to do as a business? And that's what I liked about the way Vodacom, when I was chatting to Shamil, spoke to me about how they're deploying this, because they know that they can no longer just be the so-called dumb pipes in telcos. They've got to add all of these service layers on top of what they do. And one of them is finance, and they've been very good at that. And now it's extending microcredit. And how do you do that with the data at your fingertips? Well, they're using that data and aligned with algorithms and machine learning to predict, as I said in my introduction, your likelihood of paying or being a non-performer based on when you use your phone. I don't know how they do it, but the machine learning does it. Now, it's a vast area and bespoke at the same time. So how does one actually go about innovating with this?
Yeah, and I think that's the key question. And what I find is where people tend to start is just looking at what other companies have done. But really, that's not true innovation. And what you end up doing there is really just replicating what your competitors are doing. I think if you really want to be leading with these kinds of technologies, you have to go beyond that. Frameworks like design thinking and human-centered design are really useful in the innovation process. I think, in short, design thinking asks the question, what are my customers' problems and how can I solve them differently? But I think there's an additional challenge in the artificial intelligence and space, and that's often the answer to those questions in a design thinking process. Lands you up in an answer that's not feasible, and the real constraint is data. Data is the challenge, and having the right quality of data means that a lot of what you come up with perhaps isn't implementable. And so you have to ask an additional question, and that one is around, what can I do with the data that I have? And it's really by looking at the intersection of your customers' problems and what's possible with data that you perhaps end up with those really innovative things that are bespoke to your business that you can build a competitive advantage on. The second thing I would say is it really takes multidisciplinary teams. I think that the technical people often end up building cool tools but that no one wants, because they're not solving a real need. Whereas when I work with business people and designers, people who are less technical, They often come up with really interesting things that solve real problems, but things that can't be built with the current technology. And so really it takes a combination of those skills and resources and a base level of literacy, data literacy, across everyone in the organization to really to make an effective innovation team. And I think those two things are really the key to unlocking true innovation with this tech.
And I think what you've just described means that it has to be driven from the top down, because driving the culture inside the organization, lifting the data literacy, and also understanding how your data intersects with the various problems that you're trying to solve for your customers, those are really strategic conversations. That's what you have at board level. So how do you see this fitting into a digital transformation strategy? Where would you start?
Absolutely. I think, the first thing I'd say is you really do want an enterprise-wide strategy. I think a lot of the time I see companies focusing on point solutions, and that's great because, obviously it solves a pressing need. But if you want to be a company that's data forward, that competes on its analytics and really develops a digitally enabled organization, you really want an enterprise-wide strategy. It obviously starts with the data. Data is the biggest challenge, and quality data is worth more than gold these days. I think some of the organizations I work with struggle to even have just a coherent single view of a customer, for example. And so what I recommend often is first starting with who owns the data, who's responsible for sorting out the actual quality of that data. And there's a hint here that it tends to be the heads of business units, not IT and your technical people. And the second thing to get right is then the engineering around that, essentially pooling data from across the enterprise into a single place and making sure that it is quality data and available to the data scientists. And then you've got a baseline that you can build upon and really implement a broader strategy. But of course, and you have to balance that against the need to show value early on. And so you almost have to approach this on a two-pronged approach, where you have this enterprise-wide transformation, but also you're approaching these MVPs in a lean way that really enable you to build trust with senior execs.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? Because I think in the past, so many bright, shiny new things were sold and presented as being potentially a game changer or a silver bullet. A lot of CapEx was invested and it perhaps didn't deliver. And so I think boards are hesitant or reticent to deploy a lot of capital behind these things. So you have to take that dual prong approach. Can this actually be done, though? There's another constraint potentially here with the skill shortage that we have in the country.
Yeah, that's the biggest challenge, I think, certainly in my world. And COVID has not helped. I think, what we're seeing with virtual work and hybrid work is a lot of competition from overseas. And we're losing a lot of people, both within our organization and our client organizations. And the short answer really is it's a war for talents. There's no silver bullets. You have to compete, and a few things that I've learned, my previous role at EY was leading the actuarial practice. So I'm no stranger to scarce resources. But really, you've got to go beyond the hygiene factors. And I call the hygiene factors things like, adequate pay, good work environments, perhaps even flexible work these days. Yeah. What I find the young guys want is interesting and impactful work, not just offering those creature comforts. They also want to seem to be working for a desirable employer. So you have to think about your reputation as an employer of data scientists and AI specialists. And then I find actually there's no getting around training your staff. I think everyone's hungry for it. It helps the retention a little bit, but it's needed across the country, and it will help also solve that broader systemic challenge that we have. But unfortunately, it's just an all-out war.
Yeah, it is a real war for talent. But then if you're watching this and you're wondering what to go and study, well, there you go. I mean, you want to be getting into a stream that is in high demand, that can have a huge impact and will give you purpose, where you're going to be, really the best and the most desirable company is going to be competing for your skills and services. Now, that's on the one side. On the other side, there's this fear that AI is going to destroy jobs and make them obsolete. And it's always happened, Kavi. I mean, when the loom was, made obsolete, or seamstresses were made obsolete by the loom, we know the story. It created jobs on the other side, because now, yes, you didn't maybe have to sew something yourself, but you can now service the loom. With AI, it's different. There's network effects, and it's orders of magnitude more disruptive. So the real fear, and really reading a lot of Harari and Sapiens and 21 Lessons in the 21st Century, he says this big struggle is really going to be against irrelevance versus, versus whether or not you're going to be able to adapt. How do you see the job displacement debate playing out here in South Africa?
Yeah, so my personal view really is that long-term human propensity for consumption is virtually unlimited. And so while I hear Harari's arguments, I like to point out, for example, that right now we have more people employed than ever in history. But we also have more technology and more automation than ever in history. So I do believe long-term that there will be more jobs created. And the challenge that we have right now is about reskilling people for in-demand jobs rather than worrying about en masse job losses. And certainly if you look in the next 10 years, I think that is without a doubt true in my mind. I'll give you an example. So I'm actually involved with a non-profit organization through EY. We've sort of partnered with them called Codia Futures. It's a really UK-based non-profit, and what they're doing is teaching mid-career professionals of any background really, and often of disadvantaged background, to code and then deploying them in the tech industry into paying jobs. And they've met with some reasonable success. I think more programs like that are needed to both address the lack of employment in South Africa, but also then mitigate the skill shortage in these very specialist areas. So perhaps a slightly different take to Yuval over there.
No, absolutely. And I think in my own field in journalism, where you have these huge data dumps, the Panama Papers, for example, and if you can code, you find ways to be able to sift through that data. It comes back to the data again, and be able to write very compelling, interesting, and relevant stories for your audience. But you have to have those skills to back it up. So I might be putting myself up as a candidate for some of that reskilling and training. When it comes to risks, though, and let's go back to that poll that we ran. Privacy violations, 29% of people are worried about that. Gender, racial discrimination, there's a lot in the press because ultimately these algorithms are coded sometimes with that bias in them, 8%. And the removal of the human element, which was at 52%. What do you see as the biggest risks around AI? And then how do we deal with these in a kind of ethical manner?
Absolutely. So I think, the ones that you've mentioned are obviously top of mind. In addition to some of the cybersecurity risks, so, already hackers have come up with what are called adversarial attacks. Essentially, you build an adversarial AI to go and attack AIs in the market. And companies are very exposed on that front as well. We're seeing a rising threat of cyber attacks. But as you mentioned, privacy is a key concern, equity and fairness, and I'm seeing more and more in the press every day in South Africa these days around those risks. So all of these things are really pertinent risks. I think the biggest overall issue, and it actually came out in a poll, which I was a little bit surprised about actually, because is the one of the overall trust. So when people say that there's a risk of losing the human element of making decisions, what they're really talking about is that they don't trust the machines. And so really it's about managing all of these risks together, that we over time build trust and build familiarity with consumers, but also with our employees, executives in companies, and all the other stakeholders. And so this issue of building trust when dealing with new technologies and AI is very, very pertinent. I think I'll say two things about it, because there's a whole chapter or a whole book you can write on it. The first is it comes down to basic governance. So, things that we know about every day: proper oversight, good policies, risk management, those sorts of things. Of course, there are unique issues to AI. So, if you think about identifying where AI is used in a modern organization, it's actually a really big challenge, because it's so ubiquitous, and you can pull in, an API or a little code snippet that someone else has written into any product, any system, anywhere in the organization. You've really got to deal with the issue of what is actually an AI model. As I hinted at in the beginning, that's a whole spectrum. And then often what you get is models that are built upon models. And so you have these chains of models that are built in organizations in all sorts of areas. And so errors in one model can lead to errors in others, and you have this cascading effect. Yeah. Absolutely. And so all of that needs to come together in a coherent governance framework. But then you also have to deal with the ethical questions, and these are much, much harder. So, you spoke about bias. It often gets quite technical. There are many definitions of fairness when it comes to modeling, and actually mathematically you can't have all of those definitions. So you start getting into the realm of moral philosophy, but you have to bring that down to a practical, ethical framework for your business. And I think that's going to be one of the big challenges to companies ahead. Something that all of us are going to need to get our heads around.
Yeah, someone who's studying maybe applied maths and philosophy can get their teeth stuck into. Now, what does the future of the field look like? If you were to look into your crystal ball, what do you see as the big developments that are going to shape it over the next few years?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of things changing in artificial intelligence, and it's moving quite quickly. I'll just highlight a few. So that dependence on data, for example, you've got POPI and GDPR in the UK, which are restricting things that organizations can do with data. So models are evolving to basically be able to build models on encrypted data sets, or distributed machine learning, which essentially distributes the machine learning parts to where the data actually is. So, on your phone, for example, you get to keep your data, but organizations get to build these models off them. I think on the compute side, quantum computing is going to be a whole step change, and we need to watch that space quite closely. But then also in terms of applications, I think it's becoming more and more easy to implement these kinds of things. Low code and no code applications mean that anyone can prototype this kind of technology, and it's becoming easier and easier. Ultimately, I think, if I look long term, it's really difficult to say where the field is going to end up. But I'll leave you with a parting thought on that, which is, before flight was invented, people imagined flying machines would fly like birds. Today, we have aeroplanes which fly in a completely different way to the way that birds fly, but they fly faster and are much bigger. So when we think of the ultimate destination of artificial intelligence, we often picture a human version, a machine that can act and talk and think like a human being. But ultimately, I think that where we'll end up is with something that looks completely different, but perhaps it would be even more intelligent than humans. And so it's a very difficult to predict the future, but the possibilities are endless here.
No, and it makes sense. Machines have the ability to outcompete humans in a cognitive skills contest any day of the week. And so when we start handing over some of those tasks to machines, then we could free ourselves up for maybe more creative or different areas of human endeavor, progress, and work. It's fascinating. Kavi Pather, EY, Africa Artificial Intelligence and Advanced Analytics Leader. Thanks so much for joining us here on Business Talk to talk AI and gaze into your crystal ball a little bit. Take care.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks for having me. Cheers.